Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. This week's episode is brought to you by Common Bond. Common Bond is a consumer finance company taking the student loan industry by storm. They have some of the lowest rates in the market. They even give a portion of their proceeds to Pencils of Promise to help children around the world get an education. Plus, you can check your rate online without negatively impacting your credit score. I've been using Common Bond for years, and I think that if getting your student loans paid off in 2018 is on the top of your list and refinancing may help you get there quicker, I would highly recommend you head on over to commonbond.co/happylawyer. And remember, you'll even get a $200 cash bonus for using our link. As many of you know, I am a huge fan of personal finance, and this podcast was born out of the encouragement and support that I received from the FinCon community in 2016. While I generally focus on bringing you guys stories from lawyers, former lawyers, or experts who work with lawyers, today's episode is extra special to me because I get to use my platform to share the story of a friend whose inspirational story reminds me that anything is possible. Today, I'm excited to share with you Liz's story of achieving financial independence and leaving the 9-to-5 behind for greener pastures, literally. Liz is better known on the line as Miss Frugalwoods, and today she is releasing a new book to share her story. I dedicate this episode to my own Elizabeth Nichols. We worked together back in my New York days, and we used to forward each other the Frugalwood blog posts and would share in the ups and downs, joys and challenges the Frugalwoods shared with us. And we were both elated when the Frugalwoods clan reached their goal of achieving financial freedom. And this was long before Liz and I had ever met. And so today, I'm excited to share that story with you guys in this interview with Mrs. Frugalwoods. And once you've heard her story, I'd love for you to show her your support by heading over to the show notes to learn more about how you can get a signed version of her book or sign up for a chance to receive a free copy of the book. There's so much inspirational goodness in this episode, and I really hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project. I am really excited to introduce today's guest. Even though she's not a lawyer, she's played a huge role in my life and was a huge influence on me in my early years as an attorney. And so for this show, I'm super honored to introduce Miss Frugalwoods to the show. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. For those in my audience, most of whom are lawyers, who aren't familiar with your blog, I'd love if you could just start with a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I go by the moniker Mrs. Frugalwoods, although you can also call me Liz, and I write the blog Frugalwoods.com, which is a documentation of the journey that my husband and I went on in order to reach financial independence and ultimately retire to a homestead on 66 acres in rural Vermont. So before pursuing this really unusual path through life, we had very conventional 9-to-5 office jobs. We lived in cities, New York City, Washington, D.C., Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we came to the realization in 2014 that we were deeply unhappy. We had pursued careers that brought us a lot of professional success and brought us a lot of external achievement, but we in no way were fulfilled on a deep and meaningful level. And we had this realization that we needed to radically transform our lives. And for us, one of the ways to do that is to have complete control of your money such that you no longer need to work in order to earn money. And so that was our motivation for reaching financial independence. And I should say that we define financial independence as having enough in assets to cover all of our expenses, so that we can work if we want to, which is something that we choose to do. I recently wrote a book, which is, I will tell you, a lot of work, but we work on things that we enjoy working on. And so we've created that distinction in our lives between a need to work and a desire to work because it's enjoyable. And we live on this 66-acre homestead with lots of wild animals running around, and we garden and we work in our woods, and we have a 2-year-old daughter and another daughter on the way.
I adore your story, and I'm so excited for the release of your book, and I was so honored to get to read your book. So I would love to share kind of some of the messages that you talk about in the book, a lot of which I think are pulled from your blog, but really you go into a lot more detail. And while I don't see your book as kind of a how to reach financial independence, I found it so inspirational, kind of the story of how the two of you work together to reach this joint goal. And a lot of it felt like it came out of a commitment to a personal vision that you guys had for the life you were creating. And I'd be interested if we could start by diving into how you guys created that personal vision. And I know there's a story that you tell in the book about a conversation you have in a coffee shop, but can you share a little bit about that with the audience today, about what that was like for you guys to create that?
So while I do write about money and I talk a lot about the importance of managing your finances judiciously, it really starts with what you want out of life. And so anytime I think you embark on any kind of financial experiment or financial overhaul of how you use your money and how you spend, you need to start with that question of what do you want to do with your life? Because for me, money enables me to control my time, and money enables me to live the life that I want to live every day. And so for my husband and I, it was really a question of where do you want to be in 10 years, in 20 years, when we are elderly people and we're looking back on our lives, what is it that we want to say that we've done with our time? And so I think when you take that really broad scope, it becomes a lot easier to refine your vision of how you want to use your money. So we really started with a question of when are you happiest? And the answer for both of us was when we're in the woods. We had hiking as a hobby for many years. So we were in the city all week long working. And then every Saturday we would drive these pretty long distances in order to hike mountains. And that was just sheer joy for us. Hiking, being in nature, being away from the pressures of living in a city. And so we came to the realization that we should just move to the woods. It really didn't make sense to live in an urban environment and constantly try and escape that environment in order to be in the woods. So we started talking about the possibility of, at a traditional retirement age, at 65 or so, moving to the woods. Then we thought, well, what if we did it when we were a little bit younger, maybe when we're 50 or 40? And we finally realized we need to do this now. And we were 30 years old at the time. We are 34 now. And we realized if we don't do this now, we could live with this all-consuming regret for decades. And we could spend all this time working in jobs that are not really right for us when we could have been pursuing this life that we do think has the capacity to bring us a lot of fulfillment. And so coming to that acknowledgement and that recognition was hard in a lot of ways because we'd built these successful careers and we'd spent a lot of time, as I know all of your lawyer audience will understand this. You know, I'd gone to college, I'd gone to graduate school, I had taken these increasingly advancing roles, and to just step outside of that takes a lot of courage, and it's also pretty nerve-wracking because people don't really do that. They don't really opt out of this career trajectory. So making that decision was another piece of this. And what we finally came around to is that no one else cares how you live your life. The only person who's going to care is you. And once I internalized that, it became a lot easier to accept that I wanted to do something different and I wanted to change everything about the way that we lived. And one of the messages of the book is that you don't have to want to reach financial independence. You certainly don't need to want to move to the woods. That is my own radical vision. Your radical vision might be that you want to become a yoga teacher or become a skydiving instructor or volunteer full-time at the Humane Society. I think there are so many different pathways that people would be interested in pursuing if they did not need to work for money. Or perhaps it's remaining in your career, but finding a lower paying job or something along those lines that enables you to feel as though you're really living out your calling and your passion.
What do you think was wrong, or, what do you think was the problem with the way you had been making decisions in your life prior to that decision to move to the woods? Because obviously you had been making lots of decisions to advance your career and get your master's degree and do all these things to pursue a career that in the end wasn't the right fit. What was your guiding principle at that point?
I did so many things wrong in how I made decisions, which I enumerate in the book. So if you want to know all the mistakes I made, I think the overarching mistake for me was chasing external validations and chasing the path that I thought I was supposed to follow. So there's kind of this societal chart that I think a lot of us see ourselves on, in this little track that we go down where you go to college, maybe you go onto a graduate school or law school, you get a good job, and this is what you do. This is what you are quote unquote supposed to do. And I was really doing that. I was really following that track, and I was really looking for validation and affirmation from other people and from outside sources. I really never thought about what I enjoyed doing or what I wanted to do. It was all a question of what I thought I should do. And letting go of that should notion was transformational, because there were all these things that I was spending money on because I thought I should spend money on it. All these things I was doing with my time because I thought I should do that. And what I've really come to over the years is letting go of all of those notions and instead doing what I want to do, using my money as I want to use it, which, as it turns out, means I spend a whole lot less money, and using my time as I want to use it. So coming around to really letting go of the shoulds and the external validators was key for me.
I really am glad you shared that story, because it's, I think, exactly the same kind of mindset that my listeners and myself. I mean, for a lot of people who become lawyers because they think they should, because someone told them along the line that they were smart, they were good at writing, they were good at arguing, whatever the case may be, they were good at talking sometimes, and they should be a lawyer. And then they get that seed planted in their head and they never question it. And, 15 years later, they're a lawyer and they're unhappy and they don't know why. And I think that no matter what you do, there are shoulds. So even when you're living out in the woods, and even if you're following the FIRE movement, there are still shoulds. You know what I mean? There's still people who are saying, this is how you do FIRE. This is how you build a homestead. Do you feel like it gets easier? Like, was there a moment, or was there something that happened that for you made it easier to let go of that? Or do you feel like it's still something that you work through and it's just different now?
It's certainly an ongoing evolution, and I'm very much a fan of sort of continual self-improvement, because I think when we stop focusing on self-improvement, that's probably a bad sign. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of grow and advance. And I think for us, we do everything wrong with homesteading. So really, not good examples of how to homestead. So I think we kind of let go of the shoulds a while ago. We do the best we can, but we really enjoy our lives out here. And so we do our best on the land, but we are really not experts at homesteading. And I think in terms of how you should or should not achieve financial independence, we do what works for us. I think there are some tenets of spending and investing and saving that you could sort of hold up as golden examples of what really works well, because it's a math-based approach, and there's not a lot of room for argument in some of those the math-based issues of how much you need to save. However, I think that everyone lives a different life and everyone has a different way of getting to this same end. And I also think that financial independence means different things for different people. And I think that even if a full level of financial independence maybe isn't your goal, you can put yourself in a financially stable position to have the freedom to change jobs, or to have the freedom to move to a different part of the country, or to downsize, or to find a way to spend your money in ways that are more meaningful. So I don't think that you necessarily need to reach financial independence in order to give yourself enough financial stability to take risks and to do things that might perhaps be more interesting to you. And so I think it's an ongoing process really for me of letting go. I also think being a parent is very helpful in that, because you have to be very secure in how you raise your children and how you parent. And that has also let me let go of the expectations and the judgments of others. And I really kind of just stopped worrying about what other people think a while ago, which was very liberating for me, and which was really kind of a wholesale part of my life before, that I was so focused on what other people might or might not be thinking about me. And when I stopped doing that, I had so much more mental energy, so much more space in my life to focus on other things. And so I think realizing how liberating it is to let go of those concerns really motivates me to continue on in that practice.
I couldn't agree more about parenting. I feel like for myself, having my first child did that, but the second really brought it home, because there's really no, like, it, all the rules are out the window. And as you know very well, I love being a mom and I love having my kids, and I find them to be a very grounding force in my life, because they really force me to prioritize my time and my spending and all of these things. And I think that before I had kids, to be honest, I did have an abundance of free time to just kind of complain about how little time I had. I can't believe how much I thought I ddidn't have time before I had kids.
Oh my gosh, I know. I look back like, what on earth were you doing with your life? Yes.
It's unbelievable, right? Like,
it's unreal.
I was convinced I could not have had a side hustle. Like, there was no way that I could do it when I was a young lawyer, when I was in law school. I was like, there's no free time. I'm completely busy.
I know. It's so hard. I go to school. I have to study.
Yeah.
The library by myself without a toddler in my lap trying to help me.
Correct. And now, I work full time. I have 2 kids. I have this podcast. I have, all my other various side hustles. And it's one of those things where when you have kids, you really learn, 1, to prioritize, and 2, how to just say no to stuff that you don't want to do.
Yes.
So I'm not advocating that everyone go out and have kids so they can get their life in order, but just saying.
I will say it really does. It really focuses you, and you really get your highest and best done every day, because my husband and I are both stay-at-home parents, and we both work at home. And so it's, it's kind of this trade-off of being with our daughter, working with our daughter, doing things together as a family. And I cannot tell you, I am so much more productive. Like, the amount that I get done in a day with her while really pregnant just blows away anything I did when I was single by myself in an apartment. Yeah. So I'm not there. And there actually is research on that constraint makes you more productive, more creative, and more innovative. There are some books written on this topic, which I find fascinating. And I really think it's true that if you feel like you don't have time, be bold, take risks, take on new projects, and you will find the time for the things that matter the most to you.
Absolutely. I wanted to go back to something that you've mentioned a number of times here that I've mentioned that we haven't quite described. So could you explain to people who don't know what homesteading is?
Oh gosh, I am so not the right.
Okay, disclaimer, you're not an expert.
Disclaimer, not an expert. So what I want to preface this with is that we are very, very fortunate, my husband and I, in that we do not need to make any revenue from our homestead. So we make no money on our land. We spend money on our land. And I think that there's a huge distinction between the people who farm and who do need to make a living from their land versus people like us who, the income, the revenue that we generate is from our rental property, it's from our investments, it's from work that we do on the computer, which is the easiest kind of work in the world. When you see the work that people do who are growing food and raising animals. And so I think, there's a very big distinction there that we come from a place of immense privilege and we really just enjoy our land. So I think homesteading means a lot of different things to different people. For us, we grow food. So we have a large garden, and we've lived here for a year and a half. So this is a very nascent experience for us. And one of the reasons we wanted to do it is that we are lifelong learners and there is just no shortage of things to learn out here. And so that's really enjoyable for us to constantly need to learn and innovate and Google things all the time. And so we grow a lot of food. We did a pretty good job this summer with growing food. We'd love to do more and did some preserving and some canning of food. I would say we're just kind of dipping our toes into the preservation of food thing, but we'd like to do that more. I think someday down the road, we might have animals, maybe chickens. That's a future project. My husband manages our woods and our forest, and he harvests all the wood that we heat our home with from our land. So he gets out there with a chainsaw, brings down trees, splits wood, stacks wood, loads the wood stove. We heat the house with the wood. And he also has built hiking trails through our property. So we're able to hike, and we have a pond. And I think for some people, homesteading is creating, a wholly self-sustaining homestead. That would be awesome. Maybe that's like a 10-year goal for us. I think we're kind of easing into it and figuring out what we're able to do. When you have young children, there is a real limitation because there are a lot of things that you need to do outside that you can't do with them. It's not safe to do with them. And so finding that balance is an interesting balance to strike for us.
I mean, you're in such a great position because, as you said, you got to do this fairly young. You didn't wait till you were 50 or 65 to kind of go on this adventure. And I mean, likewise, obviously, there are cons that come with that as well, I'm sure. But one of the pros is you have your whole life ahead of you to do all of this learning. I'd be interested to know what's something recently that you had to Google.
Oh, gosh.
What are your projects currently that you're trying to learn?
Oh, how to remove mold from a window. That was a recent issue. There are things like that happen all the time.
Yep.
It was very cold, and so we had a lot of condensation and ice on the interior of our windows. I didn't even know that could happen, but apparently when it's that cold and you have wooden windows and a wood stove, anyway, it was... Yeah. Vinegar is the answer, basically. But it's really just this ongoing process of how do you harvest rhubarb? Okay, how do you prepare it? How do you can it? How do you preserve it? And sort of every step of the process we have to learn, which I find really interesting. I find it to be a very enjoyable way of living because there's always more to learn and there's so much that we don't know.
One of the reasons that I loved your blog and one of the reasons I love your story is because I've always loved the idea of creating a self-sustaining home, living off the land, but felt like it was a really ridiculous vision for my life. And I think you gave me the kind of inspiration and the power to speak my own truth. And in the last couple of years, my husband and I have gotten really serious about looking at properties and places where that could be a reality. And it's not even for me about living on this place as much as this place existing. I'm not sure if we would rent it out. I'm not sure if we would live there full time. I'm not sure if it'd be a retirement place. But over the last few years, I've just really been spending a lot of time at green homes, carbon zero home. I'm not sure what form this will take quite yet, but I like the mental exercise of creating something that's has the least environmental impact it can. And it's kind of disconnected from the outside world. And so we've really, whenever we go on, vacation now, we're always looking at properties. Whenever we stay at Airbnbs, we're always looking for Airbnbs that have been designed with green elements to learn more about the technology and what's possible. And it's just a fun project. We don't know where to take us. We don't know what, the ultimate result will be, but it's just, like you said, a fun learning process about something I'm interested in that I think for a long time, I was just that's a silly thing. Why would you do that? Just do your job, retire, Be normal. Stop wanting to build weird houses that like run off water that then becomes like toilet water that then becomes like,
I tell you what, Vermont is very, has quite a few passive off-grid homes. And I really wish that I lived in a passive off-grid home. We're not quite there. We did recently get solar. But no, I think it's wonderful to dream that way. And I actually think you hit on a really important point of doing research, because for us, we spent a lot of time researching homesteading and researching where we might live. So much as I say that we don't know anything about homesteading, we actually did years of research before buying our property. And that is one of the things that I think is really important, because I think we hear stories about people who quit their jobs and run off to do something different and then fail, because they don't have the financial backing and they didn't do the research in advance to figure out how this would really be tenable for them. And so I think it is important that you are strategic and decisive in these kinds of decisions. So what you're doing, this kind of long-term searching, I think is wonderful, because A, it's fun. It gives you something to do and to discuss with your spouse, which I don't know, we love having those like crazy long-term projects to talk about. And it also really gives you a basis of knowledge so that if you did actually buy a place, you'd know it when you saw it. We looked for properties for 3 years, and when we saw our house, we just absolutely knew that it was the one, because we'd done so much research into land use and into forestry and into best practices with septic systems and wells and what kind of community we were looking for. So I think if you're working towards a really long-term goal that feels far off or impossible, doing that research is a great way to sort of pass the time and also confirm for yourself whether or not it is actually something you'd want to do.
Completely agree. And I love talking about it with my husband, probably more than he loves talking about it with me. But it also, for us, has become like a free way to spend time together, because going to see houses is, like open houses on the weekend or like...
Oh, please. That's like my number one hobby. Yes.
I knew that you would relate.
Yes.
Yeah. In the book you talk about, I think you went to 207 open houses before you bought your Cambridge house.
It's true. It's true. And it sounds crazy. I mean, it sounds like an absurd number of houses, but the thing is that we were buying a home in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. And so we knew we wanted to hopefully turn it into a rental property one day, which is what we've done. And we really needed to have a good basis of knowledge for what we were getting into. So going to that many open houses it's fun, it's interesting, it's engaging, but it also really makes you an expert in that market and in that field. And so you can feel so confident about the investment that you eventually do make.
So one of the distinctions you make in the book between that Cambridge purchase and your homestead purchase is that you really did see the Cambridge purchase as an investment that you would ultimately possibly want to use as a rental, whereas the homestead, because it was rural land, you knew you were not going to make your money back. How did you go about the processes differently? And I guess more importantly, why is that distinction important to make when you go into a home buying process? Because I think often people they kind of blur the lines between investment and emotional, like home for my family purchase.
Yes, I think it's very important to have that knowledge and make that distinction, because buying a home is not always a good investment. And I know that historically we've heard, what you must do is buy a home, then you will be financially stable. That's not the case. It's really dependent on the market. It's dependent upon what type of house you buy. It's dependent upon your trajectory through life, how long you're going to be living there, what your finances look like. There are a number of calculators. The New York Times has a really good one on whether or not you should rent or buy. And it does not always come out with buy. So I think it's very important for people to know that buying a home is not a slam dunk good financial decision in all instances. And it's interesting to note that a number of people who are financially independent and retired early actually rent. They could afford to buy like any house they wanted for cash, but they choose to rent because the numbers make sense. So keep that in the back of your mind if you're thinking about buying a home. And then if you do want to buy, I think knowing if you're looking for an investment property or if you're really just looking for a place that you want to live is important. that distinction between the two, we had a higher price point for our Cambridge home because we really saw it as an investment and we've seen a good return on it. We had very different expectations. So the home that we have in Cambridge, which is now a rental, was not really our favorite house. It was not the most visually beautiful or even the best laid out place that we looked at, but it had a lot of elements that would turn it into a fantastic rental property. Conversely, with our homestead house, this is just a house that we love. We love living in it. We love how it's laid out. It's very beautiful to us. It's very conducive to raising children. It's just a great family home. And I will tell you that we consider it basically worth $0 in our overall net worth because rural properties often don't appreciate, certainly not quickly. And, to even think that we would make our money back would be sort of aspirational. So going into your home buying, really knowing what you're expecting from it. Do you want to live in this home for 20 years? Are you looking to flip it? Are you looking to turn it into a rental? What's your long-term goal with this property? And then I think you can calibrate how much you're willing to spend off of that. And I think remembering that while it's an emotional decision, it's a huge financial decision. And you really can't buy a place just because you like the paint color. And I think HGTV and shows like,
Yep.
It's not good for us. And I have watched plenty of it. So trust me, I know it's not healthy to sort of imbue homes with human emotions. And I think we do that with houses, with cars, with a lot of different things where we really expect them to sort of fill these needs within us. And it's not really appropriate for a piece of real estate to do that.
I think that all goes back to kind of your initial point about having kind of a self-awareness about the life you want to lead. Because part of that process of buying the house that's too big or the car you can't afford is often wanting that validation, wanting to show the world or keep up with the Joneses or express yourself in a way that isn't authentic to who you are or what you can actually afford. And I think that, as Paula Pant would say, you can't afford everything, but you can afford the things that actually matter to you. But people have to take that step back and know what actually matters to them.
Right. Absolutely. I think we get into a lot of trouble when we try to buy our way into a good situation. We try to buy that new car in order to make ourselves feel good, in order to sort of prove our success or our financial stability. And, I think it's interesting to note that a lot of the people who are financially independent, who I know, drive old used cars that they paid cash for. And I think that's just really illustrative of the fact that we see a car as a way to get from point A to point B. And when you can step back and think about all of your possessions in that light, it becomes a lot easier to buy stuff at garage sales or take free hand-me-downs because you're like, hey, this is a sweatshirt. I needed a sweatshirt. This is excellent. And I think it's challenging to get to that point when you are trying to prove yourself through your stuff or through your material goods.
I couldn't agree more. And I there needs to be an intentionality about the way you spend your money. And I feel this last year, actually, I moved to a completely capsule wardrobe. And
ooh, I like that.
I've always had my kids on a capsule wardrobe, which made my life easier. And, they don't care if they're babies and they're, toddlers. And maybe as they get older, they will care. But I think that they'll enjoy having the capsule wardrobe because it makes their life easier. But I don't know why I was so resistant about myself having a capsule. I felt like people would judge me because they would notice that I was wearing the same thing more often. But ever since doing it, I don't have to spend money on weird fashion trends. I love everything I own. I always feel like I look like myself. Every pair of shoes I put on, I never have that day where I'm like, ugh, God, I have to wear the skirt that's too tight or these pants that don't fit quite right. But
what's the point? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no point.
Yeah, no. So it's really, really great. And getting that it was hard. It was a hard process because I was definitely very self-conscious in the beginning that people were going to think I was like the weirdo who didn't have money and just wore the same clothes all the time.
And nobody notices or cares. Am I right?
Even the people who notice think it's awesome.
See, there you go. Go ahead.
No, I've gotten more compliments on my wardrobe because people are like, everything you wear always looks like it matches. You're always And it's like, it's because it always does.
Because it does.
Everything I own goes together now. To be fair, most of it is just black on black, but I love black on black. Angelina Jolie wears black on black every day. It's fine.
It works really well. I have not bought any clothes in 4 years, and I've been pregnant twice. So, it just, there's a lot that you just don't need. And when you let go of that idea that, oh, I need to buy new clothes every year, I need to buy new clothes every season, you step back and you realize, I really don't. I really have plenty of clothes. And once I sort of cut myself off from that notion of spending money, I began to realize how very little I actually need to buy on a daily, monthly, yearly basis.
And it doesn't just open up like financial, opportunities for that money to go elsewhere, but it's just the time you spend shopping, the time you spend doing laundry and like maintaining and, folding and all the things you have to do to maintain your stuff that also goes with consuming.
Yes. And the stress of, I need to find a black pencil skirt, like that stress of feeling that is actually a to-do on your to-do list. That's gone for me. I don't have that anymore. I don't spend time shopping. I don't even spend time really thinking about what I'm wearing, which is very liberating.
No, absolutely. I thought about it once, and I, like you, I've been pregnant twice in the last 4 years, and I hadn't bought clothes really since before I had the baby, but like all my clothes were, because I kind of just wore my regular clothes through my pregnancy. And so a lot of things just were really stretched out and had like deformed. And my husband was like, you need to get it together. Like, I get it. You're trying to be like conservative, but there's like, and especially because I was nursing for so long, like all the necks on all my V-necks were like.
Oh, I know. Oh, forget it. With nursing, you're like, and you can't wear, I have like 3 outfits that I can wear when I'm nursing.
So I needed to do something, but instead of doing what I think I would have done before the kids, which is just kind of fill my closet with a lot of things I felt lukewarm about, I set aside a budget. I bought really quality pieces that I love and that I knew would like stand the test of time, and then kind of built in more diverse pieces as, the last 6 months, kind of slowly, but really just bought, that one pencil skirt that I liked and done. One black pair of pants that I love and done. It took time. It was definitely an investment up front, time and mental bandwidth wise, definitely spent more time thinking about one pair of pants than I had ever in my life, but I love them every time I put them on, as opposed to before, which is I pretty much hated most of my pants most of the time, but they were on sale.
But, I'm not like great with pants either. I don't know. I think it's a virtue of my height. Like pants are not the greatest thing.
No.
For me. That's
I'm not
okay.
Proportionate for pants. I don't have the right proportions for pants.
I'm not either. I don't know who does exactly, because I swear I don't know who they make these pants for. So my approach to my wardrobe is similar to yours, but kind of different. I just take hand-me-downs and free stuff, and so it's kind of whatever I have is what I have, and I just embrace it, and I just really don't care. And so it's very liberating for me, because shopping used to be a major problem for me. So not buying clothes for 4 years is a very conscious decision to break myself of buying way too much clothing.
Yep.
So letting go of that mental effort and the stress that I would feel over trying to find the right thing, it's just gone from my life, and I just love it.
Yeah, and you talk about that in the book too, which I really enjoyed reading. And I think that story really resonated for me, because I felt bad that I cared. Like you read all these stories about people who are being frugal. And like one of the things you talk about on your blog is like, you guys can eat the same food every day. Like I remember, I think
it's true.
I am not one of those people. And it like,
and that's okay.
Exactly. But like I would try all these things. And I kind of referenced this earlier about like, doesn't matter what community you are in, you can feel like you're supposed to subscribe to these norms. And so I felt like I wasn't being a good, like financial, personal finance like pursuing individual, because I wasn't willing to like cut back enough. And I just realized that there had to be ways I could do it that worked for me.
Yes.
And I do care about, I like clothes. I like shopping. I like having quality. Like that was important to me. And I just didn't want to feel bad about that. So all to say, there's lots of ways to cut this to skin this cat. Is that a saying? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and the crucial thing that you hit on right there is that it's important to you. And that's what matters. And achieving financial independence and having a pared down budget is about spending only in service of your goals and in service of what matters to you. So you and I might spend the same amount of money every month, but we're going to be spending it on different things. And that's something I really talk about a lot in the blog and in the book, is that there's not a dogmatic one right way to do things. You have to have a financial plan that works for you. If you don't, you won't stick to it. It's exactly like dieting. You cannot do some kind of diet that is just miserable for you. You have to do something that you're able to incorporate into your life, and that really is a wholesale lifestyle transformation that works for you and that allows for the stuff that you love. Because what is the point otherwise?
Agreed completely. I mean, one last thing I want to touch on before I let you go is something that you talk about a lot. And you mentioned, previously just a little bit about how privileged you guys are to not have to live off the income you make from your land. And privilege is something that you address on your blog. It's something you chose to include in your book. And I'm somebody who, I get on this podcast and I give lots of advice, and I often think a lot about whether or not I call out my own privilege enough. And I think sometimes as a woman of color, like, people don't think of me as someone who carries a lot of privilege, but I definitely think of myself. Mm-hmm. I'm very aware of the privilege that I have. Like, mm-hmm. I know that having that Columbia Law School degree means that when I write to people and say, will you be on my podcast? They're a lot more likely to say yes. Mm. I know that having worked on Wall Street means, the same thing. I have these credentials that lend credibility to me that, I worked for, but they still, privilege is privilege. You know what I mean? I can't just say to everybody, go out and start a podcast and it's going to be as easy as it was for me, because there are certain relationships and networks that I'm a part of as a result of my own life that people don't have access to. And because of, my financial resources, I'm able to pay a team to edit and manage my podcast for me. And it's basically just a hobby. You know what I mean? It doesn't make me money. So I just would be interested in kind of your thoughts and how you think about why it's important to formally speak to your privilege.
For me, it's very important to acknowledge my privilege, because I think that what I talk about is inherently very privileged. I think even having a conversation about financial independence and even talking about this idea of, what do you want to do with your life? And what would you do if you didn't need your paycheck? I think that's just a profoundly privileged question to be able to ask. And the fact that my husband and I could actually ask that of ourselves was incredibly lucky. And we didn't come from great wealth. We just had very average middle class upbringings. We don't have trust funds or anything like that. We actually both always worked for nonprofits or mission-based organizations, but we had very good salaries. And I think it's just very important that we recognize and acknowledge how much easier this road was for us because of all the privilege that we've enjoyed really from birth. We were born into very stable, loving families. We did not have to suffer any kind of trauma as children. Our electricity was never turned off. We were never evicted. And so then we did well in school. We had that support at home. We had that support at school. We did not face these significant hurdles that many people do. We went to college. We went to a state school that was pretty inexpensive, and our parents were able to help us pay for it, along with having jobs and some scholarships. And so we graduated debt-free, which really is transformational and fairly unusual, I think, in this day and age. And what's disappointing is that in the years since we've graduated, our school is now so much more expensive. It was so inexpensive at the time, but even state schools are becoming increasingly expensive in our country. So we started with no debt. We had no money, but no debt. And so we were able to really just build our net worth from, truly like $500 after we graduated to $2,000 to $8,000 to, we kind of looked back at our little graph as I was writing this book, and it was very incremental progress, but it was always up. because we weren't in debt and we didn't have consumer debt. And we had the immense privilege of getting these white collar jobs right before the recession. So we graduated in 2006 and we were able to get jobs, and then we were not laid off during the recession, whereas many of our coworkers were. And so I think it's just these compounding layers of privilege and luck. And I think it's easy to say, oh, all of my successes are due to my good choices. And sure, I've made some good choices in my life, but I've also just been really lucky. And that's important to me to understand and acknowledge, because for a lot of people, just paying rent or just paying utility bills requires working several minimum wage jobs and requires a great deal more effort than I have to put out on a daily basis. People in our country do not have access to banking, which disenfranchises you on so many different financial levels. People don't have access to education, to healthcare, to healthy food, to a safe living environment. And so I think understanding all the ways in which I've been able to have these successes is really important to me, because it's very easy to say, oh, everyone can do what I've done, but I don't believe that. I don't really think that's the case. And it's just important to me to recognize that.
I'm glad that you share that, because I think that a lot of people do get into that cycle of self-pity when they're not happy with the way their life has turned out. And I think that having gratitude and kind of recognizing your privilege is one way to kind of turn things around and build on the positives. And for a lot of my audience who are listening, they're lawyers, so to that degree, they have some degree of privilege because they are educated. They are, credentialed to some degree. They have a skill set. And despite feeling put upon because they don't love their job, they don't love perhaps a decision they've made along the way, they feel that things haven't turned out fairly for them. I hope that they realize that, it is within their power to turn things around. And so I guess everything that you've said really reminds me how lucky we are as a legal community to be able to affect change in the lives of others and in our own lives.
Absolutely. And I think what I like to say is, I think in many scenarios and circumstances, you can look around at your life and either perceive deprivation or abundance. So I like to do this exercise and say, okay, I could look around my home right now and see all of this secondhand furniture, which has Play-Doh stuck to it at the moment, and secondhand toys and walls that we have not bothered painting. And I am wearing some really old maternity clothes that like 4 other women have worn. And I could feel really bad about myself. Or I could sit in that same spot and look around and think, what a comfortable, spacious, safe home I have with a healthy family. I am so tremendously fortunate. And so I try to actually do that exercise periodically so that I can perceive the abundance and the gratitude that I have for my life. And that's another thing that really keeps me on track with my frugality, because when I'm able to perceive that abundance and be infused with gratitude, I really don't have a desire to spend money. I don't have a desire to buy new furniture or new things, because I know that that's not really where happiness is going to come from. And I think that, as you mentioned, if you are a lawyer or you are a professional who has a really good job, you're in a great position to make change if you want to, either in your own life or in the broader community. You are in a position of power and of prestige where you really could change things about your life if that's something that you want to do.
So I'm looking at the time, and I said we would run over, and of course we have, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the book, which when this airs will have launched today. So where can people grab a copy?
So you can find me at frugalwoods.com. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Frugalwoods. I'm very consistent. The book is Meet the Frugalwoods, Achieving Financial Independence Through Simple Living, and you can buy it really wherever books are sold. It's published by HarperCollins and comes out on March 6th. And if you order the book by March 13th, you can get a free signed bookplate from me, and I have the details for that on my blog.
Fantastic. I'm so excited for that. And congratulations. I'm sure that was a big accomplishment for you to get that over the finish line. And I cannot imagine how excited you are to see that hit bookshelves all over the country.
I am pretty excited.
I can't even imagine what it's like to see your name in print on a book cover.
Nerve-wracking is the answer.
Well, yes. You'll have to tell me how it feels the first time you walk into a bookstore. Not that there are that many bookstores these days, but the first time you walk into a bookstore and take a picture next to your own book.
Oh my gosh.
If I ever see it in a bookstore, I'll be sure to move it so it's front-facing so lots of people can see it.
Please do. Yes.
I will. I love doing that now. I always go and look for people's books who I know and try and put their book where people will find it.
Yeah.
So I'll add you to the list. I want to say thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with me and my audience and really being so open and honest about your journey. And I think that the book is going to serve so many people so well to inspire them to reach their own version of financial independence. Before I let you go, I have one last question, which I ask everybody who comes on the show. And that is, what do you think separates happy people from those who struggle to find happiness in life?
I think it's a question of knowing yourself, knowing what you excel at, and understanding where you can have the most impact in the world. I think that where your greatest gift meets the world's greatest need is when you can truly find happiness. I think that looking beyond just yourself and finding a way to impact positive change, however that comes to fruition for you, is a wonderful thing to do. And I think it doesn't always happen through a traditional career. It doesn't always happen through a traditional path. And having that self-awareness to always learn and to always question if you're doing the right thing and if you're doing what's most meaningful for you is, I think, what brings happiness, because I think that happiness is much more about fulfillment than it is just about glee or pleasure in the moment.
I completely agree. And I think that people often conflate the two, and they think that happiness should be that when they reach happiness, they're always going to feel that kind of gleeful joy all the time.
Right.
But there's a contentment that comes with true happiness where you're really not just happy with where you are, but where you're going in your life.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for being on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening this week, you guys, and joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to share it with your friends. And I'd love for you to head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's already left a review, sent me an email, DM'd me on Instagram, or reached out to me in any other way. I truly appreciate you and love hearing from you. And I want to just remind everyone that this week's sponsor is Common Bond. So if you're considering refinancing your student loans this year, I would definitely head over to commonbond.co/happylawyer to check them out. As a reminder, you'll receive a $200 cash bonus for using that link. Until next week, I hope everyone finds their happy.